Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Ghost Stories in Folklore. Tonight, my friends, I'm going to share with you the ghost stories in folklore about the United States' first president, George Washington, and those about his beloved state, Mount Vernon. On December 12th, 1979, Washington spent several hours riding over the plantation in the snow, hail, and freezing rain. He ate his supper late that evening without changing from his wet clothes. The following day, he woke up with a severe sore throat and became increasingly hoarse as the day progressed. All of the available medical treatments failed to improve his condition, and he died at Mount Vernon at around 10 p.m. on Saturday, December 14th, 1799, at the age of 67. On December 18th, 1799, a funeral was held at the Mount Vernon, where his body was interred. Over the years, there have been several reports of ghosts and specters on the grounds of Mount Vernon, and these reports date back as far as 1806, with a book that was published by Josiah Quincy Jr. in 1883, based on a collection of journals, diaries, letters, and remembrances. He recounted an experience his father had when he spent the night at Mount Vernon in the spring of 1806. Upon his arrival at Mount Vernon, Bushrod Washington assigned his guest to Washington's bedchamber, the chamber in which his uncle had died. Jokingly, Washington told Quincy that an interview has been granted with the former occupant of the bedchamber that night. Upon hearing this news, Quincy pondered upon the possibility that he might be found worth to behold the glorified spirit of him who was so revered by his countrymen. Quincy goes on to explain that during that night, his father was visited by the spirit of Washington, and the experience had changed his life from that point forward. Another report was printed in the New York World newspaper in 1890, recounting the early years of Mount Vernon Ladies Association. The report goes as follows. In the early years of Mount Vernon's Ladies Association, when the ladies were at Mount Vernon, they slept at the mansion. Of course, the most interesting of all the bedrooms is the one belonging to the immortal George, in which he died. And it is the original four-poster bed whereon Washington passed his last moments. This historic chamber is haunted. Of that there would seem to be little doubt. Many people within recent years have slept in it, and they declare that they were awed by the viewless presence of the nation's first president. They deny earnestly that the notion is based on imagination. Few of these temporary occupants have been able to get any sleep. Obviously, it is one thing to see a ghost, and quite another thing to feel one, to be aware of the nearness of a strange and brooding specter. They all agree that Washington visits his chamber in the still watches of the night. Mrs. William Beale and a friend of hers spent a night at Mount Vernon. At their own request, they were permitted to occupy Washington's bedroom. In the middle of the night, they were awakened by the sputtering of their candle. They had lighted one secretly and were burning it in the middle of a basin of water. Fancied they saw a spirit, it went out with a noise, and they began to feel alarmed. Mrs. Beals said to her friend, "You are on the side of the bed where Washington died." The other replied, "No, I am not. He died on your side." Finally, they decided that the question was doubtful, and there was no more sleep for them that night. They got up, dressed themselves, and sat around until morning, scared by every squeak of the windows, and at one moment were sure they heard Washington's sword clank distinctly in the corner. But that is just the beginning, my friends. Over the years, there have been several reports of Mr. Washington, not only within his bedchambers where he passed away, but in other areas of Mount Vernon as well. Just one recent report dates from the 1980s and 90s from the head guard at the estate that happened quite regularly. Frequently, an alarm would go off in the stable. Then, in about the time it would take to unsaddle and put up a horse and walk from the stable to the mansion, an alarm would go off in Washington's bedchamber. Guards dispatched to check out the situation never found anything out of the ordinary. Was this the general coming home, making his horse comfortable, and heading up to his room for the night? George is not the only reported spirit on the grounds either. In the spring of 1982, one of the interpreters working at the mansion on a particularly crowded day thought she heard someone in the room behind her. Thinking that the visitor had gotten into the area by going under the rope barriers, she entered the little parlor to shoo them out. Much to her surprise, she found an older gentleman sporting a large mustache and dressed in 19th century clothing, with his sleeves rolled up and secured with garters. When he saw that he had her attention, he shouted, "What the hell is going on here?" a reference to the noise a school group was making. The woman told him she was trying to quiet them down, and then all of a sudden the man just disappeared in front of her eyes. She later saw a portrait of the gentleman in question. It was Colonel Harrison Howe Dodge, Mount Vernon's director for about 50 years until his death in the late 1930s. Another report related to the little parlor comes from another interpreter that was working at the mansion. She felt something brush past her. Looking down, all she could see were the feet and bottoms of skirts of a young girl in 19th century dress, running across the central passage. Who was this little girl, and why was she there? Yet another interpreter was witness to even another sighting. She saw the figure of an unidentified woman dressed in 18th century clothing on the stairs. The figure was carrying a large punch bowl filled with a flower arrangement, and then, of course, the figure disappeared upon reaching the bottom of the staircase. Why are these visions returning back to the estate over and over again? Are their souls destined to walk these grounds, or are these visions of a glorious days of the past? One explanation could be the renovation efforts to return the mansion and grounds back to the way they appeared when General Washington roamed, worked, and loved his beloved estate. Either way, my friends, Mount Vernon is a great place to visit, if not for the historical aspect, but you might just run into the general and some of his friends yourself. If you like this episode of Ghost Stories and Folklore, be sure to hit the like button. And if you would like more videos from Planet D videos in the future, make sure you hit the subscribe and the bell for notifications. If you dare.